Imagine a country where the government spends billions funding wars in other nations while its own people can't afford bread. Where a single wrong word on social media can land you in prison. Where women are beaten in the streets for showing their hair. And where an 86-year-old man hiding in a bunker controls the fate of 88 million people. This is Iran in 2026, and what's happening there right now will affect every single one of us, whether we realize it or not. Let me take you inside one of the world's most secretive regimes, because the story unfolding in Iran isn't just about politics or protests, it's about what happens when an entire population decides they've had enough. And the answer to that question could reshape the entire world order. Here's something most people don't understand about Iran. This is a country that was once one of the most progressive nations in the Middle East. In the 1970s, Iranian women wore miniskirts. Universities were filled with students studying Western philosophy. Tehran had nightclubs, cinemas, and a thriving middle class. Then came 1979. The Islamic Revolution swept away everything. The Shah fled. Ayatollah Khamenei took power. And Iran transformed almost overnight into a theocracy where religious law became the law of the land. For 46 years, the Islamic Republic has maintained an iron grip on power. They've survived wars, sanctions, protests, and international isolation. But something fundamental has changed. The generation that remembers the revolution is dying off, and the young Iranians who make up over 60% of the population have no memory of life before the mullahs. All they know is oppression, poverty, and broken promises. Let me give you some numbers that explain why Iran is on the edge. The average Iranian salary is around $300 a month. But the cost of living has skyrocketed. A basic apartment in Tehran costs more than most people earn in a year. Meat has become a luxury that many families can only afford once a month. Medicine is scarce because sanctions have crippled imports. And inflation has destroyed whatever savings the middle class had managed to accumulate. Meanwhile, the regime spends an estimated $16 billion every year funding proxy militias across the Middle East, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Shiite militias in Iraq. Every rocket fired at Israel, every drone launched at Saudi Arabia, is paid for with money that could have fed Iranian children or built Iranian hospitals. The Iranian people know this, and they're furious about it. Think about what it takes to protest in Iran. This isn't like showing up at a march in Washington or London. In Iran, protesting can get you killed. It can get your family arrested. It can get you tortured in Evin prison, a place so notorious that its name alone terrifies every Iranian citizen. Yet despite all this, millions of Iranians have taken to the streets repeatedly over the past few years. That tells you everything about how desperate the situation has become. The 2022 uprising started with one death. Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old woman who was arrested by the morality police for wearing her hijab incorrectly. She died in custody 3 days later. The regime claimed she had a heart attack, but witnesses saw the bruises on her body. They saw the evidence of beatings, and something inside the Iranian psyche snapped. Within days, protests erupted in every major city. Women burned their headscarves in public. Men joined them. Students occupied universities. Workers went on strike. The chants changed from demands for reform to something far more radical. Death to the dictator. We don't want an Islamic republic. This system must go. The regime responded the only way it knows how. With bullets. With mass arrests. With executions broadcast on state television as warnings to others. Official estimates say around 500 protesters were killed. But human rights organizations believe the real number is much higher. Thousands were arrested. Many disappeared into the prison system and have never been heard from again. But here's what the regime didn't expect. The protests didn't stop. They evolved. They went underground. And they've been simmering ever since, waiting for the next spark. Let's talk about the man at the center of all this. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has ruled Iran since 1989. That's 37 years of absolute power. He controls the military, the judiciary, the media, and the economy. His word is literally law. No decision of any significance happens in Iran without his approval. But Khamenei is 86 years old. His health is deteriorating. And everyone in Iran knows that his death will trigger a succession crisis that could tear the country apart. The Islamic Republic has no clear mechanism for choosing a new supreme leader. The Assembly of Experts is supposed to select one, but in practice the decision will come down to a power struggle between rival factions. On one side, you have the hardliners, the Revolutionary Guard commanders who've grown rich from sanctions evasion and black market dealing, the clerics who want to maintain strict Islamic rule, the intelligence officials who've built careers on crushing dissent. They want a successor who will maintain the system exactly as it is. On the other side, you have what passes for moderates in Iran, officials who understand that the current path leads to collapse, who see that the economy can't survive without engaging with the world, who recognize that younger Iranians have completely rejected the ideology of the revolution. They want gradual reform, opening up to the West, and some loosening of social restrictions. And in the middle, you have the people, 88 million Iranians who are tired of being pawns in this game, who want jobs and freedom and a future for their children, who look at the rest of the world and wonder why they can't have what others have. Khamenei knows his time is running out. That's why he spent the past few years consolidating power, eliminating potential rivals, and placing loyalists in key positions. The last presidential election was essentially a coronation. Candidates who might have offered real alternatives were disqualified before they could even run. The result was a hardliner victory with the lowest voter turnout in the Islamic Republic's history. The regime called it a mandate. Everyone else saw it for what it was, a population that has given up on the possibility of change through the ballot box. Now let's talk about the nuclear question, because this is what keeps American and Israeli intelligence officials up at night. Iran has been pursuing nuclear capability for decades. They've always claimed it's for peaceful purposes, for energy and medical research. Nobody believes them. The latest intelligence assessments are alarming. Iran has stockpiled enough enriched uranium to build multiple nuclear weapons if they decide to take that final step. Their centrifuges are spinning at unprecedented speeds, and their ballistic missile program has advanced to the point where they can strike targets anywhere in the Middle East and potentially even parts of Europe. Israel has made clear that it will not accept a nuclear-armed Iran. They've already conducted multiple strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities. They've assassinated Iranian nuclear scientists. They've launched cyber attacks that destroyed centrifuges. But each time Iran has rebuilt and advanced further. The question everyone is asking is whether Iran will actually build the bomb. The answer is complicated. Having nuclear capability gives Iran enormous leverage. It makes them untouchable in a way that nothing else can. Look at North Korea. The moment they got nuclear weapons, the calculus changed completely. Nobody talks about regime change in Pyongyang anymore, but actually assembling a weapon would cross a line that could trigger military action. And unlike North Korea, Iran doesn't have China protecting it. If Iran announces it has a bomb, the response could be devastating. So Iran plays a careful game. They get close enough to the threshold that everyone knows they could cross it quickly. But they don't actually cross it. This keeps their options open while avoiding the consequences of full weaponization. It's a dangerous strategy because miscalculation could lead to war. Speaking of war, let's examine what Iran's military actually looks like. On paper, Iran has one of the largest armed forces in the Middle East. Around 600,000 active-duty personnel, thousands of tanks and artillery pieces, a growing arsenal of missiles and drones. But the reality is more complicated. Iran's conventional military is largely equipped with outdated weapons. Their air force still flies American jets from the 1970s, planes so old that they belong in museums. Their navy would be destroyed within hours in any confrontation with the United States. In a conventional war, Iran would lose badly. That's why they've developed a different strategy, asymmetric warfare. Instead of fighting enemies directly, Iran uses proxies, militias in other countries that can strike at Iran's enemies while maintaining deniability. They've invested heavily in missiles and drones that can hit targets throughout the region. And they've built a massive network of underground facilities that would be extremely difficult to destroy even with the most advanced weapons. Iran's Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, is the key to all of this. They're not just a military force, they're a state within a state. They control vast business empires, smuggling networks, and intelligence operations. They answer directly to the supreme leader and operate outside normal government oversight. If you want to understand how Iran really works, follow the Revolutionary Guard. The IRGC has another role that's often overlooked. They're the regime's insurance policy against its own people. If the regular army ever refused to fire on protesters, the Revolutionary Guard would step in. They have separate command structures, separate loyalties, and a deep ideological commitment to the Islamic Republic. Many of their senior officers are true believers who see protecting the regime as a religious duty. But even the Revolutionary Guard has problems. Corruption has infected every level of the organization. Officers use their positions to enrich themselves through smuggling and sanctions evasion. The ideological fervor that once motivated them has faded in the younger generation. And they know that in any future uprising they would be primary targets for public anger. Let's shift to the regional picture. For years, Iran built what some analysts called a Shia crescent, stretching from Tehran through Iraq to Syria and Lebanon. This network of allied governments and militias gave Iran strategic depth and the ability to threaten Israel from multiple directions. That network is now crumbling. The fall of Assad in Syria was a catastrophic blow. Iran lost its land bridge to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Billions of dollars invested in propping up Assad went up in smoke. Iranian military advisors had to flee the country. Supply lines that took years to establish were cut overnight. Hezbollah, Iran's most powerful proxy, has been significantly degraded by Israeli military operations. Their weapons stockpiles have been hit. Their commanders have been killed. Their ability to threaten Israel with massive rocket barrages has been substantially reduced. They're still dangerous, but nothing like they were a few years ago. Hamas launched the October 7th attack with Iranian support, but the aftermath has been devastating for the Palestinian group. Gaza has been reduced to rubble. Hamas's military infrastructure has been systematically destroyed. Whatever remains of the organization bears little resemblance to what existed before. The Houthis in Yemen continue to fire missiles and drones at shipping in the Red Sea, but American and British naval forces have intercepted most of them. The Houthis have proven to be an annoyance rather than the strategic threat Iran hoped they would become. In Iraq, pro-Iranian militias still exist, but the Iraqi government has become increasingly assertive about limiting their power. The Iraqi people, even Shia Iraqis, are tired of their country being used as a battleground for Iranian interests. The days when Iran could essentially dictate policy in Baghdad are over. What does all this mean? It means Iran's strategy of projecting power through proxies is failing. The enormous investments they made in these groups have yielded diminishing returns, and the resources they continue to pour into foreign adventures become harder and harder to justify to an Iranian population that can barely afford to eat. Now let's talk about sanctions. The economic pressure on Iran is unlike anything in modern history. American sanctions have essentially cut Iran off from the global financial system. Any bank that does business with Iran risks being cut off from the American market. Since almost all international trade ultimately flows through dollars, this gives the United States enormous leverage. European companies that once did business with Iran have fled. Investment has dried up. Iran's oil exports, once the backbone of its economy, have collapsed. They still sell some oil to China, but at massive discounts and through complicated smuggling arrangements that add costs at every step. The impact on ordinary Iranians has been devastating. Medicines are in short supply. Equipment to maintain infrastructure can't be imported. The technology sector, once a bright spot for young educated Iranians, has withered. Brain drain has accelerated as anyone with the skills and opportunity to leave does so. The regime blames sanctions for all of Iran's problems. There's some truth to this. But Iranians aren't stupid. They can see that their government chooses to spend money on missiles and militias rather than on economic development. They can see that regime insiders live in luxury while ordinary people struggle. They know that corruption and mismanagement have done as much damage as any foreign sanctions. Let's look at what the future might hold. There are essentially three scenarios for how this plays out. The first scenario is regime survival. The Islamic Republic has proven remarkably resilient over 46 years. They've weathered sanctions before. They've crushed protests before. They could do it again. In this scenario, Khamenei eventually dies, a successor is chosen, and the system continues more or less as it has. This is the outcome the regime is working toward. The second scenario is gradual reform. A new supreme leader, facing the reality of a failing economy and a hostile population, decides that change is necessary for survival. Social restrictions are loosened. Economic reforms open up the country to foreign investment. Relations with the West improve. Iran remains an Islamic republic in name, but in practice becomes something more moderate. This is what the reformists hope for. The third scenario is collapse. The combination of internal pressures and external threats becomes too much. An uprising succeeds where previous ones failed. The regime falls. What comes next is unclear. It could be democracy. It could be chaos. It could be a different form of authoritarianism. This is what the regime fears, and what many Iranians hope for. Each scenario has profound implications for the rest of the world. A surviving regime will continue pursuing nuclear weapons and supporting terrorism. A reformed Iran could become a normal country, integrated into the global economy and focused on its own development. A collapsed Iran could trigger regional instability, but could also eliminate one of the major sources of conflict in the Middle East. The honest answer is that nobody knows which scenario will unfold. The variables are too many. The internal dynamics of the regime are opaque. The Iranian people have shown remarkable courage but also remarkable patience. External actors like the United States and Israel can influence events, but cannot control them. What we can say is that Iran is approaching an inflection point. The status quo is unsustainable. Something has to give, whether that's the regime making genuine reforms, the people overthrowing their government, or some combination of external pressure and internal revolt. Change is coming to Iran. The question is, what kind of change, and at what cost? For those watching from outside Iran, understanding this situation matters for several reasons. Iran's nuclear program affects global security. Their support for terrorism affects stability throughout the Middle East. Their oil exports, even at reduced levels, affect global energy markets. And the fate of 88 million people, many of them young, educated, and Western-oriented, affects the moral standing of nations that claim to support human rights and democracy. The Iranian diaspora numbers in the millions. They live in Los Angeles and London, Toronto, and Berlin. They maintain connections with family back home. They amplify the voices of protesters. They lobby their adopted governments to support change. Their role in whatever comes next will be significant. There's also a lesson here about the limits of authoritarian control. For decades, experts said the Islamic Republic was stable. They pointed to the regime's willingness to use violence, its sophisticated intelligence apparatus, its ability to divide and manipulate opposition movements. They said change was impossible. But nothing is permanent. The Soviet Union looked invincible until it wasn't. The Shah of Iran seemed secure until he wasn't. Every authoritarian system eventually faces a moment when the population stops being afraid. We may be approaching that moment in Iran. The next few months and years will be crucial. Watch for signs that the regime is losing control. Watch for cracks within the elite. Watch for the succession crisis that Khamenei's death will trigger. Watch for how the United States, Israel, and other powers respond to provocations. And most importantly, watch the Iranian people themselves, who have shown again and again that they will not accept permanent subjugation. History has a way of moving slowly until it moves all at once. Iran in 2026 feels like a country on the edge of something momentous. Whether that something is reform, revolution, or repression, we'll only know in retrospect. But one thing is certain. What happens in Iran will not stay in Iran. The ripples will spread across the region and around the world. And that is why you should care about this country of 88 million people, halfway around the world, struggling against an aging theocracy that has overstayed its welcome. Their fight is not just about Iran. It's about whether people anywhere can challenge tyranny and win. It's about the arc of history and which direction it bends. It's about all of us. Keep watching. Keep paying attention. Because this story is far from over, and its ending will affect us all.